read this morning from Joshua, starting in chapter 4, verse 1. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and to carry them over with you and put them down in the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites." To serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, "What do these stones mean?" tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones will be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. And so the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp, and they put them down. The armed men, Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priest who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. Verse 15. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the ark of the testimony to come out of the Jordan." And so Joshua commanded the priests, "Come out of the Jordan." And the priests came out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to its place and ran at flood stage just as before. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their fathers, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan River before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did the Jordan just what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people on the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until we had crossed over, their hearts melted, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites." Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the day you've given us, especially this opportunity to study your word. Guide us, help us to understand, and help us to apply. In your Son's name. Okay, last week we talked about crossing the Jordan. We talked how the Israelites camped at the Shittim, which was, and let me pick this up real quick, which is at the foot of Mount Nebo on the eastern shore, and they had moved, they were at that camp, and they moved over to the edge of the Jordan River. And the Israelites were told to consecrate themselves, to prepare themselves, to make themselves set apart and holy, because they're about to do something amazing. The priest was told to take the ark and lead the people across the Jordan River, which they did. They were to select one representative from each tribe, 12 representatives. They were to go and escort them and go with them into the river. And then when God entered the river, and when I say that, I remember back, the image is basically that just like in those days, the king rode on the throne, and the servants, or in this case the priest, would carry the throne of the king. Well, God is the king of Israel, always was, always will be. And he was riding on the mercy seat, as we know, is basically where his throne was on earth. And they led him into the middle of the river, or carried him into the middle of the river. So as God went into the river stopped flowing. While he stood in the middle of the river, the Israelites, the entire people of Israel, over 1 million people, crossed over on dry land. We see that God exalted Joshua in the eyes of his people at that time. Let him know that Joshua was his person. Listen to him, do what he says, because God gave him the power, just like he did Moses. God also showed he had the power to drive out the Canaanites. Listed, there were 7 different groups of people, and I wanted to touch back on that real quick because I didn't really clarify real well. But basically, the Canaanites, Canaan is the son of Ham. And you remember how Ham was cursed after the flood. So that curse fell on Canaan. His descendants are the peoples that were listed, the Girgashites, the Hittites, all those. The only one that's not listed in Genesis chapter, well, I'll just read it to you. I got it right here. Genesis chapter 10. Verse 15 says, Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hittites, Archites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. The people that are listed in Joshua are all in that list with the exception of one. It's called the Perizzites. Some people think it was a small group of one of the others. Others say that it basically has the root word and everything that means villagers. The idea being that Canaan, the Canaanites, lived in Jericho in a walled city, whereas the villagers lived in little communities here and there all over the place. And so the idea being when it talks about that group, it's saying not just all these big kings with their walled cities, but all the villagers that are scattered here and there, whatever, throughout the land would be taken and defeated by the Israelites. So when he says that God showed that Israel that he had the power to drive them out, just like he had promised long before this, 40 years before actually, God demonstrated that he was the living God and produced more fear in those people. In 2 ways. The first, well, if you remember, Rahab said that they were afraid because of 2 things. Remember what they were? What was the first thing? And they left Egypt, what they did? They went through the Dead Red Sea on dry land. The second thing was, as they came in over here on this part of the land, they defeated 2 Amorite kings and completely destroyed them. Those 2 things had created fear. Now we find that the Israelites have just crossed on dry land. Uh-oh, history's repeating itself. So you know what they automatically assumed? They were about to completely destroy them. As a matter of fact, I wrote this little narrative. Imagine this. The armies of Jericho were on one side of the raging river. As a matter of fact, there's a picture of the raging river. Actually, I did one better. Not that one. They're on one side of the raging river. We talked about how that was actually a barrier. Just like the kings and the Amorites had gone out to attack Canaan, or the Israelites, the Amorites had gone out, those 2 kings, to try to stop them. The army there of Jericho probably did the same thing. You got to go defeat your enemy while you can. So they're standing on one side of the river, and across that river is the and so as they're sitting there, they're looking across the river, as you can see right there, and as they look across the river, they see this horde of people, 1 million plus people. They know that they can't cross the river. Everything is fine. Their army is sitting ready to do battle as required, because they know the Israelites are coming. So they're getting ready for battle, and they're sitting over here, and then suddenly, imagine this, as they're there and the Israelites are on the other side with all their possessions, meaning I'm coming to stay, on the other side, and then suddenly you see their king or their God riding on his throne out into the river, and the river in front of you suddenly dries up. That barrier instantly gone, and you got 1 million people over there, and their God or their king sitting in the middle of the river. And you just saw that. You know what they did? Ran. Where do you think they ran? To the walled city. Have you ever thought about the fact that there was no battle there? They were hiding. They had retreated to the walled city where they thought they would be safe. That's why when the Israelites come after them, the scenario we're going to talk about next week is going to take place. They are backed up in the walled city. They're not ready to fight no more. As a matter of fact, as we read in chapter 5, verse 1, it says their hearts melted with fear and they had no desire to fight anymore. And so this is what we're beginning to see here. They fled in terror to the walled city to hide. As we go through today, we'll be looking at, let me put this where I can see it. I'll have my back to you. Don't trust it. This here is where Shittim is. Here's Jericho. Right in here is where they're going to cross the river. And right up in here, a couple miles away, in this area right here is Gilgal. Okay? And so as they're crossing this river, and we saw some of those pictures, and I'll refresh those. We looked at that. We see that they march out into the river. Remember we talked about how the ark would lead them? And the tribes, this is the way they were told to march, or to move the entire people of Israel by tribe. So here we see the Levites carrying the ark exactly the way God told them to do it back in Exodus. You know? And so we see the ark with God before them, leading them as they cross the river. As they cross the river, we see that it dries up. This is after flood stage at the checkpoint there at that place in crossing the river. And we see that they go across the river to Gilgal. I'll show you that in a minute. When they set up camp, this to the left is the way we talked about how last week, how they were in camp and the ark was in the middle and had to come out before them. This is the scenario they would have. So as they set up camp, this is the way Israel would set up camp in Gilgal. This is the way God had commanded it previously. So I assume they follow that same pattern. Then we're going to, as we spread today, the Bible says they went into the Jordan River, back out of the Jordan while God, and sitting on his throne out there with the priest holding him and everything, and those 12 representatives went out and would pick up one stone. And they would carry it back, and they carried it to Gilgal, which is not a short hike. And we know, and I know, because I had to go around Jericho like 3 times. And it is hot and dry, and it didn't even, and Gilgal was about 2 miles away. And it wasn't 2 miles what I did, but it was plenty. So it's rough territory. So they carry them up there to Gilgal, and they put them down, and we find that they put those stones down. Well, they put them down, and I read 2 translations, in case you didn't all catch that. Some translations, and NIV has translated it like differently, but a lot of translations translate verse 9 to say that Joshua then went out where that God was and the priests were and all the Ark of the Covenant, all this was, and set up 12 more in the middle of the river. And most translations say that, and the flow of the whole book, because then after that it comes back to, okay, now they drop those stones in camp, and Joshua comes in there, the priests come in, and it talks about setting up the 12 in the camp. So in my mind, I'm not saying I'm an expert, in my mind, Joshua set up one in the middle of the river. That's what the New King James, which is in your book, and several other translations say. The NIV changed the wording there to say that, and he went ahead and set them up as if he set them up at Gilgal. But then we go back and he pulls the people out of the river. God comes out of the river after that, so it didn't make sense to me. So here's a pictorial representation. I suspect that's probably not it. Actually, I suspect all these are not it, but it's a representation of what you would have saw there in this particular place. All right, so he sets up the bones and stuff, and this is some pictures that I took of Gilgal. Fancy place. Real rough territory. All right, let's go back real quickly to my map. There it is. And like I said, right down here was where they basically crossed the river in this area right in here. That checkpoint is right in here. Actually, it's right here. I'm pointing my computer and you can't see me. I like my imaginary map I used for 20 years now. I'm getting something for real now. All right, so they would have crossed somewhere in this area here, and then they would have camped up this way. And here's where Gilgal is, or where they say it is today. I think it is. But you'll see that it is a green place. It's a place where it's basically another oasis. So it's a place where a large mass of people could actually survive there. And it's at the foot of the mountains as they go into the land. All right, so this is Gilgal. And this is what you're looking at. That's what you're looking at. They did. But it was able to produce them. That's the key thing about the oasis part. But and as we found out, they do a lot of farming of everything, and wherever they can, they plant all kinds of stuff. We found a place where they just had giant nets just covering acres and acres and acres and acres so they could grow stuff under. But basically, this is the land that you're looking at here. As you look around at it. Pretty rough territory. These are the Judean mountains over to the west. This is looking toward Jericho. That's what you'd be looking at. All right? All right, let me set that aside. And all right, there we are. Okay, that brings us pretty much kind of a physical presentation of where we are. So here today, when we get into the 4th chapter, we get ourselves to a place now that Joshua has, last week we saw he had crossed the river. He takes the 12 stones, he tells the people to set up camp at Gilgal, which we see is just a couple miles away. It's in the land of Canaan, the promised land. The importance of this is it's the first time they have physically come and occupied the promised land. Up until then, they were on the eastern shore, was not their territory that God had promised. He had promised the one to the west. And when they crossed into that, now they've actually entered into the land. Once they went through the Jordan River. So as they set up at Gilgal, which we already mentioned is another oasis just west of the river and a couple miles northeast of Jericho, this would be their initial base of operations. 12 representatives from the 12 tribes were chosen. If you study the book, they made a big deal talking about the 12 tribes. How do you determine who the 12 tribes are? Yeah. There's different ways. They're talking about sometimes it's 12, sometimes 13, whatever. There's really only 12 tribes, you know. There's 12 sons, 12 tribes, but there were 12 land allotments. Okay, Joseph got a double share. Why did Joseph get a double share? Do what? Who gets a double share? Oldest. Was he the oldest? No. What happened to the oldest? No, wrong child. Wrong. That was a grandfather or two or whatever. Sorry. They have a habit of blowing it when they have the opportunity to have it. The Bible tells us in Genesis, I don't remember 30 something or whatever, that the oldest, who was Reuben, went and slept with his father's concubine. Why would he do that? Because he says, I'm the oldest and I'm going to be taken over and she belongs to me soon. And so basically it says that he basically, by asserting himself that he was the oldest, his father Israel took, or Jacob, whatever you want to call him, took away that birthright from him and gave it to the one who actually saved him, which was Joseph, which was his favorite all along. You know? So basically, that's what happened. He lost it because of that, and he gave it to Joseph. Joseph was given a double portion, and it was named after his children, Ephraim and Manasseh. And of course, Levi, we see, was given cities to reside in all the territories, so that they would be there to guide the people in the ways of God. So the 12 tribes, even though they're technically the 12 children, when it comes to territories, Levi didn't have a territory and Joseph got a double portion. So you still have 12 territories. All right, still 12 territories that would belong to them. Some mentioned in the book, I don't know if you read it or not, talks about Revelation. I think it's chapter 10. Revelation chapter 10 has a different list. It lists all the actual descendants of Israel, including Joseph, except for Dan. And in Dan's place, he lists Manasseh, one of Joseph's sons. I got any idea why he did that? Dan had not just disappeared. If you go back and read about the taking the land in Judges, I think it's Judges 10, but I can't remember for sure, we find that Dan, whose territory was to be in this area right in here, couldn't defeat them, so they said, forget that, and they went all the way up here, and they wiped out a peaceful village area and killed everybody in that was very peaceful and welcomed them in. And not only that, they took a priest and some household idols down here at Shiloh, down in this area, and took it with them, and then they went up there and said, oh, we're going to start our own territory, our own land. And they brought their own religion with their own priest and everything else. So when you look at Revelation, probably the reason it's excluded is because Dan excluded themselves. They gave up their birthright. They gave up their right to the promised land. And so when you're talking Revelation, you're talking about land of promise, the final promised land. You obviously see Dan wasn't representative of those who gave it up. Wouldn't be there. So they gave it up, they gave up their God, and everything went up there. So that's why the list changed or whatever. That's just a side note. It's really not important, but it's something that the book brought out and I wanted to touch on for a minute. All right, so now we go on and it says, when the whole nation had finished crossing, verse 1, then each representative went before the ark in the river. They would go back out where the ark was, or they were already there. We're not real sure. But basically, they went before the ark, before God, and they selected a large stone out of the river. They put it on the shoulder, so it had to be fairly large. Plus, even if it's small, after a while, walking for 2 miles carrying a rock like this, it gets hard to do. So they put it on the shoulder, and they headed for Gilgal. They took it to there where they were to build a memorial. We find that Joshua, as we talked about before, would go out while the priests were still out in the river, and he would set up 12 stones out in the river, as it was detailed in verse 9 in some translations. And he would set those 12 up there to commemorate the spot. And then he commanded the priests to come out of the Jordan River and bring the ark with them. And as they came out of the Jordan River and they set their foot on dry land, what do you think happened? Raging river, we can show it again. The raging river comes racing back right behind them to let them know that it wasn't a fluke. They were definitely came across because it started and finished as long as God was standing in the river holding the water back. As soon as God stepped out, the river went on and things carried on. Now, in verse 1 of chapter 5, it says, and now all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan, and all the Canaanite kings along the coast, heard that the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over. We had crossed over, and their hearts melted, and they no longer had the courage to face Israelites. That's why they were walled in the city of Jericho. God had done exactly what he said last week in In chapter 3, he was going to demonstrate to the people of Israel how he was with them. And in the same process, he was going to demonstrate to the enemies of Israel, I'm with them. And you're all in trouble. And we see that that's exactly what he did. So it goes on, it tells us there that they put up a memorial. A memorial to the people of Israel forever. Okay? Alright, so he sets up those stones at Gilgal in the camp. Over there in the middle, I don't know. Sets up the 12 stones that came from the river into a stack or a pile. There's other drawings that depict them stacking them flat rocks, one on top of each other, kind of like they did in Moana, if you ever saw Moana. It has a memorial. That's one way people did memorials like that. But either way, he stacked up the rocks and put it there and told them this was a memorial to remember forever. And what was the memorial about? When their descendants asked, what's these rocks standing here for? What was it to tell them? Remind them of what had happened, how Israel had crossed the Jordan into the land of promise on dry ground, all because God made it happen. It was a memorial in order to accomplish just that. All right. Going on down in the chapter, it says that verse 23 and 24, it talks about, and God did this so that all the peoples on earth might know. Might know what? He was the one true God. Verse 24, that the hand of the Lord is weak, mighty, powerful, and so that you may always fear the Lord your God. When I thought about this, I thought of one thing in addition to all that. 12 men come out of the river, they bring these rocks and they put them up, and they say this is a memorial to remember that God is almighty, all-powerful, and that we should fear him, because he brought us into this land that he promised us, even through the raging river. Nothing stops him, nothing whatever. 40 years before that, 12 representatives went to this same land, and they came back and said, God can't do it. I mean, think about it. 10 of them did anyway. God can't do it. They're like giants. We're like grasshoppers. God is not all-powerful. That's basically what they said. I know we just came through the Red Sea on dry land. I know that the army of Egypt was just defeated, but God can't take this. And we're not afraid of him. We're afraid of the Canaanites. They were afraid of man, not God. And they thought that God didn't have the power to do it. 40 years later, their children said, wrong, Dad. 40 years later, we see 12 different representatives coming together with a totally different message. One that says God can do it, and we need to fear him. Totally different. All right. So after this, and we go into chapter 5, we look at it briefly, or whatever, some things take place. The first thing we find is that all the men are circumcised. Why is that? They had not been. Their fathers and parents had been before they left Egypt, remember? Or was it at Mount Sinai? Maybe it was at Mount Sinai. After they came out of Egypt, they were at Mount Sinai. But because they rejected God, God basically said, fine, I'll be with you, and that's all I'm going to do. And so nothing else happened, and all these children grew up. None of them had been circumcised. So now he says, okay, I'm bringing you into your land, into my land, of which you're going to live in a land that I told you I would give you, and you would not earn or deserve. And to do that, circumcision represented what? Possession, what?
An outward sign.
An outward sign that says, I belong to God. And so after they went through this, they built this memorial, they recognized how to be fearful of him and his power and all that. Then we find that they all go through circumcision in order to say, we belong to God. And they do that before they make the first battle into the land. As a matter of fact, the Bible says they sit there for 4 days. It says they need to recover. Okay, so they're there for 4 days, and then we come upon the Passover. And so 4 days after they crossed over, I think it was on the 10th, and then on the 14th of the Passover, they commemorate the first Passover since back at Sinai, or back since they rejected God. Now they do it, and they do it in their own land, in their own place. They remember how God had delivered them from the Egyptians. Actually, let me rephrase that. Passover doesn't represent that. It represents how he delivered them from the hand of God and his judgment. Remember, God brought judgment on all those in Israel except the ones that he saved through the blood marked on the door. And they passed over them. So here they remember, once again, how God had delivered them from judgment. Their deliverer, their Savior. And they remembered that Passover, and as we go through that chapter 5, you can read it on your own, they have that Passover, and the next day, something stops. I wouldn't say rain based on that picture, but no. What was it? Manna. God no longer fed them like he fed Elijah. He stopped feeding them with the bread from heaven. Now, they ate for the first time of the produce of the land. And we see the area we're talking about, there's several oases right along there where there would be, you saw the trees, where there would be great produce and everything for them to feed. And that's what they did. They ate of the land for the very first time. And that's kind of where we're stopping here in the middle of chapter 5 before we wake up and maybe track you down a little bit, a couple miles away to a town where everybody's cowering in fear. A couple things I want us to think about as we do that. First of all, any other questions about what exactly took place, or any comments? I talked too much, I know. All right.
I think the age of Israel at this time now is very, very young.
Absolutely.
Yeah, these are young men and women, and they've got a long life ahead of them with the law of God.
I agree. All right. So here we are, and a couple things to take away from this is, first of all, is God opposed to remembrances? No. Many times, and I'm guilty of that, we've seen the abuses of that, and therefore we don't like to see crosses, and we don't like to see symbols and things like that because of what they have become. But the reality is the cross is a symbol, is a remembrance. There are lots of things that are remembrances. And God wants us to have remembrances. To remember what he did. To remember those things. There's nothing wrong with looking at a cross. Put the cross up here, or we got that up there showing that he's the king. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I idolize that and turn that into something more than what it is, which is something that caused me to remember the real God, but I turn it into that, we have a problem. And that's really throughout history where the biggest problem is, and we talk about slippery slopes, is when we start saying one thing, we start talking about the cross or this or that, and suddenly we've got all kinds of things. It's like some people talk about Easter or whatever. They make it into a holy day. God didn't make it a holy day, but it is a time of remembrance. God did sacrifice his son in the spring. It is a time to think of those things. And to refuse to do that and take that opportunity is not necessarily a good thing. But when you make it more than it is, that's where the problem is. You know, sometimes we struggle with Christmas and what all that means because we know Jesus wasn't born at that time of year. Everything tells us that wasn't it. It was used as another holiday. It was taken for that and all the other things that go around. But the reality is, at that particular time of year, there are a lot of people who once or twice a year think about Jesus. And it's an opportunity to remember exactly what happened in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and not John, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, how God came into this world to save it. And all the great things and the blessings. There's nothing wrong with the remembrance. It's when we take it and make it into something that God didn't intend. That's where the problem comes in. Prime example, Israel. These people, they ended up coming up with so many remembrances that they spent their time, and they would, by the time we get to Samuel, they're going to do it. They're going to take the Ark of the Covenant, which we've already talked about as the throne of God, and they would forget that God sits on it and says, if we take this box with us, we're going to win the war. And in the process, they lost because their faith was not in what was represented, but it was in the box. And that's what happens when we turn around and idolize crosses or any other things and special occasions, all those things. There's nothing wrong with the remembrances. So we need to remember that, because sometimes we do what we always do. We have a knee-jerk reaction and go all the way to the other side. All the way to the other side. Now, I remember years ago at the very chapel, and we were talking there, and somebody was talking and said, sometimes we just feel like when we come to services, we have to come in through the windows. Everybody went, huh? They said, well, all the other churches come through the doors, so we got to be different. And sometimes we feel like we have to do that as a knee-jerk reaction, even though that's not the case. And so we need to be careful about that. God wants us to have remembrances. As a matter of fact, He instituted one. We're going to talk about that here next. Last thing we want to talk about is this. Joshua versus Jesus. One's a Greek name, one's a Hebrew name, but they're the same name. I don't remember if Corey talked about that the first week or not. But basically, we're looking at a great parallel that's going on here. We're talking about Joshua coming in as the deliverer and savior, bringing them into the land of promise, physically. Jesus, or Joshua, God's Son, would do the exact same thing. He would deliver and save and bring us into the land of promise, the spiritual one. We're told in Romans that we are grafted in, and we are spiritual Israel because we are grafted in by faith, like Abraham. So you've got two different things. One is we see what's happening here. Think about it from the spiritual aspect, from our aspect as God's people today. Joshua, Jesus, same job. One was physical, one was spiritual people. In addition to that, both of them led in battle to defeat the forces in opposition. We look at Revelation and all the way through the rest of the Bible, and we see how God will always defeat His enemies. And the last one is death. To defeat Satan, to defeat all the spiritual warfare and all that. And the last one to defeat is death. God is going to take, and then we'll be into that land of promise. Same scenario. Both Joshua and Jesus are going to bring judgment on the enemies and completely destroy. I just mentioned that about how Jesus does it with death and all, and Satan and all that. Both would lead God's people into the land of rest. And the people would follow how? When you walked out in the middle of the river, well, you walked out the river by what? Faith. They didn't do anything. They just let God do it. And they followed by faith. Just as Jesus is asking us to do the same thing. Follow Him in faith. Both begin deliverance and entrance into the land. Where at? Jordan River. You remember seeing that map or the Google Earth, and it had a place that said baptismal place of Jesus? Jesus was baptized in this same area. Both of them started into the land at that point. That's when Jesus started His final ministry into conquering. Both of them would defeat their enemies, or let God defeat their enemies, because right in that same place, to the west of that is or all around it is the Judean wilderness. You know what happened in that place? Jesus was tempted, and you know what He said? I don't need to turn these stones into bread. I don't need to take all the nations of the world. I don't need you to worship you. God. What did Joshua do? Nothing. God did. God let him cross the river. He did nothing. You're going to find out that's exactly what happened to Jericho. They did nothing. God did it all. Alright? So both let God do that, and then both set up remembrances. They set up 12 stones to remember how they came into the land, and we have a remembrance today that Jesus set up to remind us of how we're going into the land. I think it even says it, doesn't it? In remembrance of me. Each week we have an opportunity to have a remembrance of how we're going to be able to, how God's taken us into the land. Not that we did it, but that He did it. We have that same remembrance. So we see those parallels as we look at taking the land and all that. There's so much about physical Israel and spiritual Israel, when I refer to us today, that are so comparative that you can learn how God will deal with us by looking at that. Any other thoughts, comments? I went over, I'm sorry. All right, next week, Battle of Jericho.